Assalamu alaikum, I'm Carl Arrindell and you're watching In Focus. Now, my guest today is Dr. Kwasi Kwarteng, a British politician and historian. He has served as a Conservative Member of Parliament since 2010, representing the constituency of Spelthorne in Surrey. He was born in London. His parents migrated to the UK from Ghana in the 1960s. Dr. Kwarteng attended Eton College as one of a rare breed, a King's Scholar. He then went on to the University of Cambridge, where he read classics and history at Trinity College. He was famously a member of the team which won University Challenge in the 1995. He attended Harvard University on a Kennedy Scholarship and then earned a PhD in economic history at Cambridge University. Prior to becoming an MP, Dr. Kwarteng worked as an analyst in the financial services and is widely recognised as a historian, having written a number of books on the subject of the legacy of the British Empire, including Ghosts of Empire and A War on Gold, a 500-year history of empires, adventures and debt. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Kwarteng, and welcome to In Focus.
Alaikum salam.
Now, a statement from the leader of the Conservative Party earlier this week prompted a headline in the Daily Mail to read, "Theresa May continues her audacious bid for traditional Labour voters by promising to make large business publish an ethnicity pay gap." Now, the proposed measure apparently is designed to tackle, and I'm quoting, the injustice of unfair pay differences, a theme which Mrs May made prominent in her opening speech as Prime Minister back in July 2016. She said then, and I'm quoting her again, "The fact that different ethnic groups are being paid less for doing the same jobs is an injustice which cannot be allowed in 21st century Britain." She spoke of delivering a fairer deal for all workers by extending rights and protections. Is this an audacious, as the papers have referred to it, perhaps even cynical attempt to adopt the clothes of the Labour Party? Or do you genuinely believe that the Conservative Party are now the party of the working class?
I think the Conservative Party has made great strides reaching out to lots of people, people who weren't necessarily voting Conservative, who aren't from traditional Conservative backgrounds. And I think the Prime Minister's appeal to those people and to the country is very much along the lines you described. I think she's very interested in social justice, in having a fair society, a society in which people are not discriminated against because of their ethnic background or their religion or their gender. And I think the agenda, the policy that you referred to is an aspect of that. I think it's an outrage and it's a great shame that people should be paid less simply because of their ethnic origin. And I think the Prime Minister is doing the right thing in moving the Conservative Party in this direction to try and equalise some of these historic injustices.
You do accept, by the tone of your reply, that this has not traditionally been Conservative policy?
Sure. No, I agree. I mean, I think that parties evolve. I think we went through a phase, certainly in the 80s, where we had to get the economy going. That was the main focus. I think as the time has gone on, we have a multicultural society. Everyone knows that. And I think even though we've made great strides as a society, 30 years ago, someone like me would not have been a Conservative MP. There were no ethnic Conservative MPs 30 years ago. We've made strides. But there's still a long way to go. And I think the sorts of policies that the Prime Minister is outlining will go a long way in getting us forward, making progress on some of these issues.
Now, I'm aware that you've taken a keen interest in your constituency of Spelthorne in trying to promote local business community with the launch in 2013 of the Spelthorne Business Plan Competition, whose purpose, I think, is to stimulate new business projects.
That's right.
It's been often argued that protective legislation is a restriction to company growth, tying the hands of prospective employers in who would think twice before employing new staff. Do you think that, from your experience, that small, medium or large businesses will respond positively to this new initiative by the Prime Minister for fairness and the improvement of worker protections? In particular, what do you make of the proposal to have a representative from the ordinary working staff members on the board of those companies?
Look, I think the first thing I'd say about that is that people often see some kind of split, a dichotomy between supporting business owners, but supporting small business and enterprise, and supporting workers. And there seems to be a view very much on the left in politics that there is a kind of zero-sum game. that you can either support the workers, in which case you're not supporting the business owners, or you support the businessmen, in which case you're not supporting the workers. I think that's a crude dichotomy. I don't think it's really relevant to the 21st century. You can have great businesses which have great worker protections. You've got great businesses who actually make the work environment more friendly to their workers. And actually, in the long run, if you have a good and reasonably paid and happy workforce, you're going to get much more productive businesses.
So where do you think the model for this is coming from? It sounds almost as though we're sort of stepping into an Engels framework of worker control, worker management.
It's certainly not worker control. I mean, let's get this in perspective. The proposal, I haven't seen it because the manifesto hasn't been published, but the proposal is, I think, for a workers' representative. The representative may not even be an employee, but it's just having a board director. Typically, a board could have maybe 9, 10, even more members, and just saying one member whose specific focus may be to look after workers' interests. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think it necessarily cuts against capitalism or business owners.
So that could be a trade union leader, for example.
Well, I don't know what the nature of the representative will be. It could be someone from business whose interest is to represent the workers. I mean, just as in a governor of a school, you can have a governor whose job is to represent the teachers. It doesn't mean they have to be a teacher. So we have to see how that evolves. But I think this, for too long now, for 100 years, if not more, we've seen business as a kind of battle between business owners and shareholders and workers. And I don't think that that's a very productive or accurate model, actually, to describe business relationships in the 21st century.
Talking about social injustice, House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee report, chaired, interestingly, by a Conservative MP, Gina Miller, last year warned that Muslim people in the UK are much more likely to be unemployed than any other faith group in the country. It suggested that not enough was being done to ensure that British Muslims were afforded the same employment opportunities as the rest of society. Now, putting that in numbers terms, 12.8% of Muslims are registered to be unemployed compared to the national average of 5.4%. The government's response to this report was to say, and I quote, "The government is committed to making Britain a country that works for everyone. We want all people, regardless of their faith or gender, to have access to the same opportunities so they can reach their full potential." Yeah. Do you think that says enough? Is there enough being done to end discrimination in the workplace?
Well, I think that the statement you read out is very much a statement of intent, a broad statement of intent. And clearly we need to work out details more specifically about how we can integrate our Muslim communities into the wider society so that we can all share the same opportunities. Now, I think you're right to say that the percentage of unemployment amongst the Muslim community is too high. But I think a lot of that has to do with a two-way process of engagement. I think obviously things like language skills are very important if you want to enter the workplace, and we have to do more. But also people in the communities themselves have to do more to try and learn English, learn skills, computing, that sort of thing. But I think it's a two-way process. I always say that. I'm a Conservative. I think people have individual responsibility, but I do appreciate also that the government has an obligation to all its citizens to make sure that.
So we've got this sort of battle between work ethic and government responsibility.
True.
There was a report, I'm reminded, last year, I think, where the Department of Work and Pensions did a SNAP study. They sent out 3,000 CVs, yes, and they placed Muslim or Asian-sounding names on the CVs. And the response from prospective employers was virtually nil. And they changed them to English-sounding names, and the response was so dramatically different that it stimulated the suggestion that there needs to be penalties and something of a violent response to those companies who had failed.
Well, I don't know the details of this study, but I think this sort of small discrimination, this petty discrimination, is something we have to fight against constantly. And I don't think that it's acceptable for people to discriminate in that blatant a way. I also think that the government could be doing more in terms of outreach and all of that. But also, I think there's an onus, and I have to say this, on the communities as well to reach out, to make sure that skills are learnt. We've had many immigrant groups in Britain over decades, centuries even now. And they've managed to integrate. The way they integrate, the way I've integrated, you gave this big, long history of my career and all of that, and my education.
There was more,
and it was very fulsome,
yes.
And it was very detailed. But the point of that is that I have integrated as a son of immigrant by trying to get a good education, by working hard, and I think people are doing that. But it's also that's also important. And I think with the Muslim population, I think I see lots of incredibly talented people coming through. But we can do certainly more to try and get more Muslim youngsters into great jobs.
Now, in 2012, you co-authored a book with 4 other MPs.
Yes.
I see that smile break out across your face. Britannia Unchained, which it was argued that, and I'm quoting you, once they enter the workplace, the British are among the worst idlers in the world. The book sought to a return to the contributory principle, it said, envisioned by its founder, Sir William Beveridge, that you get benefits in return for contributions.
I didn't say that. I mean, that was so you've got to get it right. I mean, the idler comment, I think you've taken out of context. Yes. And it was very much a survey that people were saying this about British workers, regardless of whether it's true or not. I mean, we were addressing a very frank concern about motivation in the workplace, about work habits, about productivity. I mean, it is a fact that our productivity has been consistently quite low. But the flip side of that is that we have very low levels of unemployment compared to Greece or Italy or even France.
So are you saying that the headlines, which one of them said, "Tackle lazy Britain, say new Tory young guns"?
Yeah, it's a good.
Was that an exaggeration?
It's a good headline. But the book is 112 pages long. It's not that long, but it's more detailed. And there's a more subtle, if you like, presentation of arguments and ideas in the book than is captured in those headlines. I think there was a real issue, certainly in 2012 when we were in a recession, about issues regarding productivity, issues regarding the ability to work in a kind of work environment, and what things we were actually creating, what our workforce was doing. And the book, where we were young MPs, asked provocative questions about that. And I think it's a shame if MPs, young MPs, people who are new to public life, can't actually make arguments, can't actually make serious think tank thought pieces, if you like, without sort of screaming, tabloid headlines. I mean, it was entertaining. It was quite an interesting debate. But I'm very surprised to see after 5 years, the books have been in print. Britannia Unchained was published 5 years ago.
Yeah, but look,
you still rake this back. I mean, it's entertaining.
We are talking about the same period where austerity was reaching its peak. There were headlines and documentaries about the slackers, the benefit cheats, and your book came in the heart of that, sort of saying, it
was part of the debate. I mean, we've got to, as a country, I mean, it's a fantastic country. I've had huge opportunities. Many people, many of your viewers will have had huge opportunities in Britain. But we've also got to have a look at, what we are as a society. You've mentioned the fact that, there is still discrimination. There are still difficulties faced every day by some of our immigrant communities. And that's a bit of self-criticism. You're looking at British society and saying, we could do better here. We, as the young MPs, were talking about the workforce, we're talking about productivity, we're talking about some of the attitudes that people have sometimes in the workforce, and we're saying, let's have a debate about this. Let's see how we can improve things. Now, and I think that's an entirely legitimate thing for members of Parliament to be doing, to be asking those questions.
But do you believe, with that sort of overwhelming feeling that we need to pull up our straps and, to use an old Tebbit phrase, get on our bikes, maybe more, did you not feel that the levels to which the austerity measures impacted on certain of the most vulnerable parts of our society were totally unacceptable? I mean, I'm thinking...
It was unacceptable. I mean, forgive me, Carl, people forget this, but when we entered government in 2010, the coalition was formed, the British deficit, the amount we had to borrow, was something like £170 billion. The government had to borrow more than £3 billion a week in order to keep the government going, in order to keep benefits, to keep all the public spending. There had to be some measure of restraint. Now, we could argue about, the precise aspect of the deficit reduction policy, but it was largely a successful policy. Okay, we didn't manage to balance the books in 5 years as we suggested we would, but today the deficit is 50 billion. It's a third of what it was in 2010. and it's going down. So the Conservative government, over time, will be able to balance the books, I think, in a few years.
But the question
and that's a great achievement. And that doesn't just happen.
No,
you've got to take tough
asking
decisions about expenditure. You've got to take tough decisions about the bills that you're paying. And we took those tough decisions, and actually the policy worked.
But there are many people who would say, fair enough, we had a deficit and we had to deal with it. But the people who bore the burden of that, overwhelmingly, were those who were the most vulnerable in society, and that the Googles and the Amazons who were paying no tax were being let off scot-free.
Well, the Googles and the Amazons were employing lots of people who were earning lots of money, who were all paying tax on the money that they were earning. So let's get that straight. I mean, we could get into a debate about corporate taxation if you want to, but you know that's. And I think you're right. But the problem that we had was that the bits of the bill, if you like, that were expanding rapidly was the welfare bill. I mean, we introduced a policy regarding welfare. The benefit cap, you will remember, that was £26,000. We said no family should get more than £26,000 from the taxpayer. This was the most popular policy. YouGov polled it, 75% of people agreed with that policy, because you had people in London, not many, but people in London under the last Labour government who were earning £100,000. They weren't earning it, they were being given £100,000. And that was completely unacceptable. And we took a tough decision, and it actually wasn't that tough because most of the British public agreed with it. Now, I think you're right to say that some people did suffer disproportionately, and you know, I think with disability living allowance, there were issues regarding the so-called single bedroom payments, all that sort of stuff. The bedroom tax, it was popularly called. Yeah, these were difficult decisions. You know, there will never be a right answer. We can always revisit those debates and say we could have done this differently or we could have done that differently. Not everything we did. I'm a rare politician. I say not everything we did was right. Not everything we did. We don't have a monopoly of wisdom. But the broad direction, the broad strategy in terms of dealing with the financial crisis and the fiscal debt we had, the deficit, I think that was the right policy, and we did the right thing. And actually, the proof of the pudding was in the fact that we got re-elected in 2015. I mean, we went to the country, and at that point they could have chucked us out. We could have had a Labour government. But actually, the electorate said we want to stick with the Conservatives, and they gave us a majority. They had enough faith in the Conservatives at that point to give the Conservative Party a majority. And so broadly, I'm not saying everything we did was right, but broadly it had a lot of support, and I think we were on the right track.
Now, a recent report by the Council of Mosques in Bradford served to highlight what they saw as the big issues facing the Muslim community in the run-up to the election, which takes place in about 4 weeks' time. Whilst they listed hate crime and poor education high on their list of priorities, along with unemployment and what they said the diminishing opportunities in traditional industries, which once provided the lifeline for migrants coming to Britain, they expressed extreme concern over the increasing levels of scrutiny by government and for security services, who have, to all intents and purposes, branded the Muslim community a suspect community, with the PREVENT strategy being cited as the significant source of tension. Should we be doing away with PREVENT? And should our government be more actively engaged in the implementation of a policy to counter the rise of Islamophobia?
Look, I think it's a difficult balance that any government has. Clearly, it's absolutely wrong to stigmatise a whole community for the crimes of a very, very limited number of people. That's unacceptable and wrong. I understand that. And as an immigrant, as someone who has a liberal disposition, I think it's unacceptable. That's the first thing I'll say. Having said that, we cannot deny that there is a small, in many cases tiny element of the Islamic community that is bent on doing destructive acts. We saw just earlier, a few weeks ago, an attack in the House of Commons where a policeman was murdered. We saw tourists being killed. Mercifully, only 4 people lost their lives, but it was a tragedy. And this attack was done in the name of a radical Islamist ideology. We can't run away from that. We can't pretend.
Okay, so we can't run away that they are not citing Islam as their justification. But does that mean, and this is a key question, does that mean you need to profile a whole community? In one case in Birmingham a few years ago, they had cameras monitoring the movements of everybody in the community.
I think it's a fine line. Obviously, I don't want to go down a police state route. But we can't pretend that these problems don't exist. We can't pretend and keep on pretending that there isn't a problem. And actually, what I would say is that if you look at Britain compared to other countries, particularly France, we've actually been rather blessed in this country. We've actually not had the scale of attacks, and God forbid, I hope we don't have the scale of attacks in the future. But that's a function not only of luck, but also of great skill from MI5 and other services. And I think the government's plan, again, its policy, is something that is bearing fruit. It's controversial, sure. We live in a democratic society. People should be able to debate these issues freely. But I think that the broad approach is the right one, and it's successful.
Now, you mentioned controversial. I have to get on to the topic of Brexit, I'm afraid.
Sure.
Now, I want to address those issues. Firstly, I'd like to ask you why you regarded Gina Miller's legal challenge in the High Court to force government to allow debate in Parliament on Brexit to be outrageous, offensive and arrogant. These are your words.
Sure.
And whether in hindsight you might have concluded, as the judges clearly did, that you were possibly wrong. Where do you stand now? Was the challenge about fundamental and important questions relating to our constitution and the ability of Parliament to be allowed to having a say in the process, or as you thought at the time, a cynical attempt to frustrate our exit from the EU?
I know Gina Miller. She's charming. She's a very highly intelligent, able person. But she had a life as a model and as a fund manager. I don't think the British Constitution was necessarily the top of her priorities. And I think, from what I read in the papers, she was very, very upset about the Brexit vote. And I read that her son, said, "Mummy, you always do things. You always do something. What are you going to do to stop it?" And I think this was an attempt to frustrate the process. I will always think that. I know they say it's about the constitutional right of the House of Commons and the constitutional right of Parliament, but these were people who didn't really... I mean, if she'd stood as an MP or had shown in her life at any stage an interest in public life or politics,
okay, but so you're doing
then I would take it a little bit...
You're doing an analysis of what drove her to do it.
Absolutely.
Okay, but what about the end result? You ended up... What we had was a major, historic debate that took place, a legal debate, which ended with it overwhelmingly falls into the conclusion.
It's overwhelming. It was 8-3, something like that. So it was not unanimous. There were 3 judges who said that the case shouldn't have been brought, or rather that the Prime Minister did have rights under the prerogative to trigger Article 50. It was an interesting piece of legal history. We did have a debate, and as I understand, I remember, the Article 50 legislation was passed without a single amendment. I think there were 9 amendments called, and not a single of them, one of them actually was passed. So it took time.
So
it was
no
good.
regrets with your comments?
Not at all. I mean, I think that... we could... I've met Gina Miller a number of times. She's a very engaging person. But I think when you strip it down, this was an attempt to reverse the referendum.
Now, finally, I just want to ask you, you're contesting as the incumbent the seat of Spelthorne, which in the last election you won with a comfortable majority of 14,000.
352, I think it was.
You're addressing an audience on this channel, which is made up predominantly of people I suppose you can class as a growing part of the ethnic community in Britain. Going back to the 1997 elections, the majority, 80% of black and ethnic minority voters supported Labour.
That's right.
Admittedly, this has dwindled with every passing election, now estimated to be less than 68%. Why do you think the Conservative Party represents the best interests of black and ethnic minority voters?
I think the Conservative Party proposition is very simple. Firstly, we're going to govern in the interests of the whole country, regardless of people's backgrounds, regardless of their gender, regardless of their ethnicity. We will stick up for people as British people, as a whole, as the nation. And I think that's very important. The second thing I'd say about the Conservative Party is that many of the values that many of our immigrant communities have regarding family values, regarding the ability to work, to support your family, to set up a business, those sorts of issues are things which the Conservative Party is very, very happy with. in contradistinction, in contrast to, I think, the Labour Party, which now is essentially an Islington Marxist sect, from what I can see, that have captured the Labour Party, and their interests are not related to the vast majority of people, not just people from ethnic backgrounds, people across the country from whatever background find this quite an alien, quite an odd creed. It's something which doesn't really speak to them when they see Jeremy Corbyn, with Hamas, or singing the praises of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, or all of that. They don't really, it doesn't resonate with them.
So we're now going to have the Conservative Party of a raised fist and up the workers as your slogan.
Well, no, I think it's a broad national. I mean, you look at the polls; it's remarkable, Carl. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. The polls consistently show the Conservatives above 45%. Now, the last time, and it would be a miracle if we get more than 45%. The last time a major party got 45% in any general election was before I was born, was in 1970. And that's a very long time ago. So it's a historic election. I hope that Theresa May gets a broad mandate, and I hope we can hit the 45% mark.
On that note, Dr. Kwasi Kwarteng, prospective parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party in Spelthorne, thank you very much for joining me on Islam Channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.